Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break. It was short, but I hope you got the chance to meet some of your fellow attendees. Our next keynote speaker is Alex Marshall, Group Business Development and Marketing Director at Clarke Energy. Alex will be sharing his insights on the captive power and the NHS, history and the future, whilst also outlining the NHS's deployment of energy-efficient CHP technology, reducing costs and carbon emissions for hospitals. And he'll be helping us answer questions like, what is the current performance of the technology? How does this fit with the future of net zero carbon, the government's UK hydrogen strategy, and heat pumps? So, Alex, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Helen. Hospitals have been using their own sources of local power for many years. Initially, the focus was on providing backup energy in the event of a power failure. Hospitals were also some of the early adopters of combined heat and power technology. Clarke Energy's earliest installations date back from the late 1990s, and now we have over 120 megawatts installed across the hospital and healthcare sectors. These have not only generate both electricity and heat close to the site of use, they also help to reduce energy bills and increase spend on patient treatment. They also are able to deliver sizable savings in carbon dioxide emissions. In the face of the important transition to net zero carbon, existing combined heat and power installations are also set to deliver tangible carbon savings compared to grid-supplied electricity until around 2030, according to the Association for Decentralised Energy, and compared to the National Grid's Future Energy Scenarios document. However, they are primarily natural gas fueled. Therefore, what is the future of this technology in the hospital and healthcare sectors? Many existing Yambacher CHP installations are hydrogen ready and able to accept blends of hydrogen from 20 to 30% in the natural gas supply. That's engines as is installed today. With a 20% hydrogen blend into the gas grid and the fuel for the engine, that would result in a further reduction in 7% of carbon emissions. They are also able to accept 100% renewable biomethane. So that's gas which is pumped into the gas pipelines from waste treatment facilities. This largely derives from the treatment of waste and is sustainable and renewable fuel. In the event of a transition to a 100% hydrogen gas grid, the gas engines can be readily converted to operate on this gas too. Any conversions would be typically completed at around about the point of a major overhaul, which occurs at 60,000 hours of operation, approximately 7.5 years or 15-year intervals. INEO Yambacher recently released its Ready for Hydrogen range, currently based around the 4 Series engines, which are with other larger and smaller units available in the pipeline soon. Another option for your gas generating asset is to use them as a source of backup power, as opposed to a diesel generating set. These backup power assets can again be refueled by renewable gases or gas from the grid. The UK's hydrogen strategy points to CHP plants and flexible generation using gas engines being the primary early use of hydrogen in the gas grid, and that hydrogen strategy was only released last week. In addition to this, CHP technology can be combined with battery energy storage systems, solar PV in the way of microgrids, helping to improve resilience and optimize local power supplies. CHP plants can also be readily combined with heat pumps to power this renewable heating source. So the future of power in the hospital sector is likely to not be a one-size-fits-all, but a combination of the lowest carbon and most resilient energy systems. And if you'd like to learn any more about CHP engines, hydrogen, and biomethane, please get in touch with us at Clarke Energy. Also be happy to take any questions that you might have on this technology or how it fits in the future. Thank you.
Alex, I've got a few questions before you leave us, and I'm beginning to see 1 or 2 popping in as well on the screen. So if we start off, for owners of existing CHP plants, can these still deliver carbon dioxide savings?
So yes. So if you look at the makeup of the power supply network at the moment, there is significant embedded carbon in that. So irrespective of swapping to renewable fuels, just the natural gas fueled units alone are currently going to be delivering carbon dioxide savings till about 2030. Those existing assets can also accept hydrogen as part of the fuel if it's available in the pipes, and they can also currently be used fueled by biomethane, and that's kind of a contractual thing. So the molecules are still methane, but you're using a renewable methane supply contractually via the Green Gas Certification Scheme.
There's so much talk about hydrogen at the moment. What's the impact on changing hydrogen levels in natural gas for the operation of a CHP plant?
So till around about 20 or 30% of the blend in the gas grid, you're not going to see very much change at all. Hydrogen at the moment, hydrogen has a lower energy density than natural gas. Therefore, after about 20 to 30% hydrogen, you are going to see a drop off in the output of some of those units. That's until the technology evolves. These are very early stage projects because there are not many of these yet done. So we anticipate those engines to be ultimately to be at a very similar level, using complete hydrogen as a complete methane source.
And is it possible then for a CHP plant to run from 0% hydrogen to 100% hydrogen?
Yes, yeah. Again, this is possible. What you will need to do, though, is to have a special engine variant able to handle both those different gases in parallel and to run from the complete spectrum from 0 to 100. So it would require a special engine model. But yes, that is available too.
And is it possible to fuel our CHP plant with biomethane using the national grid?
So yeah, so I alluded to it before. So biomethane is basically a renewable methane source, and you can contractually track the molecules from the point of injection into the grid to the point of use at the hospital with the green gas certification scheme. So if you contractually sign up to that, you can using the gas grid at the moment a renewable gas as a fuel.
And if a CHP plant's coming to the end of its life, what are the options out there?
So typically you would see that as 15 years of installation. You would have the option to upgrade the unit to the most efficient unit, install an engine able to accept larger hydrogen volumes if you wanted to play with the hydrogen strategy and to play with hydrogen in the gas grid. You could also look to combine the gas engine with heat pumps, because heat pumps, again, as well as draw from things like electric vehicles, they're still going to need electricity, and there's not enough electricity in the grid. So gas engines can be used in parallel with heat pumps. And then finally, you can retain the gas engine if it's an old unit and maybe use it as a backup generator as opposed to a diesel unit, which is clearly lower emissions.
Alex, just to take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in. Paul says, how sure are you that hydrogen is going to become mainstream and available for hospitals in the future?
Again, that depends upon the speed of adoption of the technology. You're talking about the mid 2025s to when you're going to see some degree of molecules going in the grid. The HyNet scheme in the northwest of England is one of the first significant sources of this. Clearly, you can go straight away to hydrogen if you use an electrolyzer, but at the moment that technology is relatively high cost. There are some demonstration options available through the UK's hydrogen strategy, so there may be grants available to support these early demo plants. But yeah, there is a cost associated with that too.
Vanessa says, have you got any case studies you can share on joined CHP and heat pump systems?
We've just completed our first project. It's a glass house a glass house being a greenhouse in Kent, and that is due for approval imminently. So I can share that with you. Yes.
And Andrea says, is there any waste related to the hydrogen use?
So burning hydrogen is much more cleaner fuel. So when you burn hydrogen, you get water as an output. And also blending in hydrogen into the grid, you would actually see lower NOx emissions. NOx being one of the emissions from an engine. So hydrogen's got a number of benefits as to emissions.
Just wondering, and Vanessa's got another question for you, but where can we point Vanessa for that case study, by the way?
It's not published at the moment. I'm waiting for the customer approval, but yeah,
it's a bit secret at the minute. But Vanessa's also saying, have you installed any carbon capture storage systems on NHS sites?
Not on NHS systems. So we've been doing. It depends what you mean by carbon capture. It's a whole range of different things. So the glass house, the greenhouse sector has been doing it for a number of years. They take the CO2 out and use it to grow tomatoes. We did a project in Northern Ireland taking the CO2 out of an engine exhaust and using it for the fizz in a major soft drinks brand. And then there are a range of other technologies which are out there, largely coming out of universities, less proven, but able to combine carbon dioxide with things like digestate or put it in the water as a salt or a variety of other uses, which are a little bit less proven. So if you're interested in a demo plant, these are early stage. Yes, but not on NHS, but we would love to do it.
Christina says, apologies if you've already mentioned it, but what's the cost difference between gas and hydrogen, and when is it likely to become cost effective to carry out the change?
I don't have a specific figure off the top of my head, but yeah, it is significantly more expensive in the short time, and that really depends upon the source. There's very little in the way of green hydrogen available in the UK. You'd need to do an electrolyser on that, which is a capex version. Blue hydrogen is likely to come from the HyNet scheme in the northwest to start with, and that again will have a cost premium. But natural gas at the moment is relatively cheap, so it's a bit of a balance there. So I don't have a specific figure, but if you contact me separately, I can try and find you a specific for
that. Robert says, is this reduction of 7% based on England or Scottish national grid carbon factors? And is also one of the other issues with hydrogen, the seals for piping and micro cracks?
So that is based upon using pure methane as a fuel and pure methane plus the balanced hydrogen. So there's a curve available there for the CO2 reduction. So that's not based upon a gas grid composition. That's hydrogen and CO and CH4. And your points on hydrogen and leakage, I can't answer that specifically. We as Clarke Energy have been using hydrogen as a fuel for over 15 years, largely as a blend with other gases coming out of the furnacing industry in particular. So we've got experience of using this. It isn't a problem to do it safely and to do it well, as long as you've got well-engineered installations.
And a personal question from me to end on, because we've finished the questions from the floor, but I was chatting to somebody at a very well-known car rental company the other day about EVs, and he's driving a hydrogen car, which he fills up at Cobham services. But how far are we from seeing, the public in hydrogen cars as opposed to EVs, batteries?
Well, I can't answer that specifically, but there is a debate as to whether or not there are sufficient lithium deposits to really bring on all the batteries we want as soon as we can. So hydrogen is a store of energy, and it's going to be a toss-up between for the domestic transportation sector whether they go electric vehicles or hydrogen. Technology is available, but it depends on the rollout and the availability of hydrogen to be used as a fuel.
That's fascinating to watch, and that was really, really brilliant. I think we've had a real quick fire session there of getting lots of people's questions in from the floor. So Alex, it was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. I mean, remember, if you want to engage further with our exhibitors, do check out the digital marketplace. Our next keynote speaker is Preeya Bailie, Director of Procurement Transformation and Commercial Delivery at NHS England and NHS Improvement. Preeya will be revealing to us the relationship between our healthcare and the environment, and the vital role procurement plays as far as health and environmental benefits go. So Preeya, it's over to you.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak today at this event. And it's really so critical to discuss a topic that is at the forefront of the global conversation and a priority for the NHS. I think over the last 18 months, even during the pandemic, the Greener NHS team have been making rapid progress in the run-up to COP26 this year to really bring a spotlight to the NHS on the work that we're doing on net zero. We're working with our suppliers, with our regulators, and across some government departments to really support the net zero agenda. And during this session, I wanted to cover three things. So as you've outlined, procurement practice and really how critical this is in the NHS, and how our spend can really help to drive and influence the supply market, but also to help us to achieve net zero. The engagement that we have with our suppliers, we contract with about 80,000 suppliers. So again, a real opportunity to influence the market, but also how we engage with our regulators to ensure that they are enablers to helping to drive this change. And then also lastly, I want to talk a little bit about social value and government policy. The climate change is a health emergency, and we hear that statement so regularly, but it absolutely is fundamental. The climate change poses a major threat to our health and as well as our planet. The environment is changing, and that change is accelerating, and this has direct and immediate consequences for our patients, our public, and the NHS. There's a lot of good work that's happening out in the trusts, and the Green NHS programme has been really looking at how can we showcase and share those different pieces of work. And I think in the last, an example, in the last few days, when the first trusts, UCLH, so University College London Hospital, have declared a climate and health emergency. And they published a 10-point plan to how they're going to achieve net zero within the next 10 years. And so that's a really nice example, but shows again the direction, the drive from the NHS to support this agenda. I was watching the video as part of that release from UCLH, and there's a really key point where they talk about some of the changes that they make, some of the buying decisions that they've made. But one of the clinicians, she mentioned making it easy for people to do the right thing. And I really liked that, because I think that's absolutely sums up how procurement can make some of the products and services available, but also how some of the decisions that we make, especially in our clinicians, help us to really to do the right thing. The role of procurement is critical in achieving net zero, and we can and we must buy better, smarter, greener. The NHS is one of the largest UK's buyers of goods and services, and we contribute, so we're the largest public sector contributor to global emissions, and responsible for nearly 5% of the UK's overall emissions. And initially, when you think 5%, you think it's not so much. But I was speaking to Nick Watts, who's our Chief Sustainability Officer, and he said, well, 5% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start to look at it in the global context, 5% is the same as a small country like Denmark, Croatia, are some of the examples that he gave me. And again, that really shows the responsibility that we have in the NHS to drive this agenda. Our supply chain is critical. At least 60% of our carbon footprint comes from our supply chain. And some of the targets that we've set is for direct emissions. We want to be, for indirect emissions, we want to be net zero by 2045. For our direct emissions, we want to be net zero by 2040. And these dates, some of them sound far away, especially when you think about UCLH saying, you know, in the next 10 years. But when we published the Greener NHS report last year, part of one of the key statements in that report was that that the NHS will no longer contract with suppliers that are not in line with our ambitions. So by the end of the decade, so really in the next 10 years, so by 2030. And again, when you start to think and even look around the news of all that's been spoken about this agenda, it really is an emergency, and it really is important that we have more ambitious targets to support this. Our goals of providing value for money for taxpayers, improving patient outcomes, those haven't changed, but we do need to see this in the bigger picture. And the purchasing power that we have in the NHS can really help to drive positive environmental, social, and economic change, which adds value to our communities, the patients we serve, as well as improving health by reducing pollution. And we've seen, especially the last 18 months, what the significant role that procurement can play. When we think about some of the programs like the Nightingale hospitals, I was personally involved in establishing the London Nightingale Hospital. We think about the vaccines program. These are really prime examples of where procurement has been able to help us to deliver world-class change. But also when we start to look across everything the NHS buys, that's where procurement is absolutely critical. From the first, to support this change, one of the statements I've made within the team is that from the 1st of April 2022, so next year, so about 6 months away, all NHS tenders will include a 10% weighting on social value. And the reason I talk about social value is, again, aligning with wider government. Social value is defined as in 5 areas. So looking at COVID-19 recovery, tackling economic inequality, fighting climate change, equal opportunity, and well-being. And it really starts to look at social value as being how we support some of the local agenda, but specifically how we fight net zero, so how we achieve net zero. 10% is our starting point. The more that we can start to normalize social value and net zero within our commercial activity, the more the supply market will be able to adapt and respond to these ambitions. Working with our suppliers and with our regulators to support achieving net zero is critical to driving this change. And we do need our suppliers to work with us and also to be on board with this. I've established a supplier forum, so again, engaging with all of the key supplier trade bodies to help develop a framework, and we call it the Evergreen Framework. So how do we develop a framework that really aligns and understands the plans that our suppliers have, but how do we start to benchmark and understand their progress? We've just heard previously from the speaker around electric and some of those opportunities. Those are markets that have moved significantly. But again, when we start to think about everything the NHS buys, especially in the clinical space, how do we start to work with our suppliers to really drive and have more sustainable options available for the NHS to purchase? We've asked some of our critical suppliers and some of our biggest suppliers to share with us what are their carbon and climate, their plans around carbon and climate change, and also to respond to carbon disclosure projects. So really go into detail around their ambitions and the support they can bring. It is important we understand where our suppliers are on this journey. Some of our suppliers are ahead, which is great. And it is inspiring to see how many suppliers are really committed and want to be part of this change. What's important for me personally, again, is around our SMEs, so some of our smaller suppliers. How do we work with some of our smaller suppliers to ensure that we don't leave them behind with this change? We recognise that it is a change, and I think for me that's probably one of the biggest risks I flagged initially around our procurement programme, but we want to make sure that all of the requirements and asks are manageable by our entire supply chain. I'm often asked about medicines and it being heavily regulated, and it absolutely, I think it is rightly so that our medicines are heavily regulated, but this is where it is important that we work in partnership with our regulators. So when we are going through accreditation processes, whether it's medicines or whether it's medical devices or any of our products, how are we starting to take into consideration the environmental impact as well, and looking at the full life cycle of those products. So we have started to engage with MHRA, NICE, CQC to really understand, them to understand the ask that the NHS is putting on the entire supply chain, but also how they can be an enabler to supporting that change as part of the regulation process as well. And I think, last but not least, thinking about our staff and coming back to what that clinician said in the USLH video, how do we make it easy for people to do the right thing? And how do we start to influence the decisions that we make in the NHS? This summer, my team, we've hosted a number of training events, workshops, procurement workshops for trusts across the NHS. And this is really about how we start to embed procurement in all of sustainability in all of our procurements. We'll be producing how-to guides, which will support trusts and ICSs on their green plans, and really identifying how procurement is integral to those green plans. The majority of the staff in the NHS are supportive of the greener NHS agenda. And so what we want to do is really enable and support our procurement teams to make sure that those people have sustainable options that do not compromise patient care. Also working with SCCL, so NHS Supply Chain, again, they are fundamental to this journey. And again, how do we, through the options available through them, make more sustainable options visible to be a great way to drive this change? Part of my program, we launched I'll call it almost the 5-stage decision tree, and it's the 5 R's. The first R is around reduce, and this is really about how we can start to influence the decisions that every clinician, every person working in the NHS can make, and even for wider as personally. When we're thinking about the first R is reduce, so can you do without the product? And that's really the best way to start to reduce our carbon emission is really around how do we use less. When we start to think about the full life cycle, some of the areas, especially around single-use plastic, a lot of those items are incinerated. So actually the best and most effective way is that we reduce and can we do without that product. The second R is reuse. So can we buy reusable products instead of single-use? So a big focus now is especially some of the theatre areas, we've got the biggest waste, single use. Can we start to look at some of those products and look at reusable products instead? And again, critical is working with our regulators to think about how can we encourage this as part of the accreditation process. The third R is about buy reprocessed. So can we buy reprocessed or refurbished? We tend to always buy new. But when we start to look across globally, so many other countries within their health system do buy reprocessed or refurbished. And so everything from whether it's our furniture to some of our medical devices, can we start to reprocess those and support that movement? The fourth R is about renewable. So really understanding our supply chain. What is the product made of? and really starting to challenge our suppliers to start to look at more renewable raw materials that are used within the products as part of our decisions. And then the fifth and last one is buy recyclable. So again, thinking about what our products are made of, but is some of that recyclable? I think, again, reiterating, many trusts have shown it is possible to reduce the emissions associated with our supply chain. We want to hear more about best practice. I think there's nothing like having a real example to inspire others to show what can be done. An example I was thinking about this morning was around Geissens and Thomas's. So their Director of Procurement at GSCT, David Lawson, he's taken forward around looking at how they reduce their indirect or Scope 3 emissions by switching their supply of deliveries from road to using the River Thames. So they have a consolidated centre down in Dartford, and it's a really great initiative, really innovative initiative, which is reducing transport emissions and significantly reducing air pollution, and especially around London and around the hospital, and especially with lots of queuing up of delivery vehicles. It's a really innovative looking at in the round. But even taking that further, that's something that could be looked at wider across the whole of London. So I think in closing, what I'd like to say is this is a critical agenda to the NHS, to our patients and to our planet. And it's important that our staff, but also our suppliers, that all together we're driving forward this agenda to help us to achieve net zero.
Preeya, thanks very much indeed. I really like Preeya's analogy of the 5% being sort of the equivalent to a small country like Denmark, and also the 5 R's, I think, were really inspirational and easy to remember. So before our lunch break, I'm delighted to say that we've got representatives from Canon joining us. First, we're going to have a short film, and then we'll be joined by Paul Chiplin, Director of Sales and Marketing, CO2 Balance, and Daryl Collin, QA Manager, Environmental Representative, and H&S Advisor for Canon Medical Systems. The film demonstrates that climate change and the destruction of the natural world is having dramatic environmental consequences around the world. 2021 offers an unprecedented opportunity for positive change in UK healthcare, and Canon Medical Systems UK aim to be at the forefront of helping the NHS achieve its ambitious goal to be the world's first net zero national health service. This video provides some practical guidance and advice to help you achieve your NHS targets.
We're proud of our company philosophy, Made for Life. It's at the heart of everything we do, improving the lives of both people and the environment. We are also proud to be carbon neutral, carbon zero heroes. Since 2014, the carbon from every purchase of Canon medical imaging equipment is offset to high impact projects in developing countries, meaning every system you invest in contributes to a greener future. With our partner CO2 Balance, we provide clean water through our borehole project, as well as cooking stoves, which reduces the need for burning vast amounts of firewood. These programs positively impact on the lives of people in rural Africa. As a direct result of this project, more than 25,000 people have received help to improve mortality, health, quality of life, and female empowerment. Because of this, we are the only UK medical equipment provider to have gained official partner status from the United Nations Division for Sustainable Development Goals. We also care about the lives of people and the environment closer to home. We are working with the charity Support Dogs to train assistance dogs to help enrich the lives of vulnerable people living with epilepsy, autism, or disability. We're also continuing to support professional league basketball club Sheffield Sharks in rolling out the Respect programme, which focuses on improving the opportunities for young people to break away from a cycle of disadvantage and achieve better opportunities in life. We are committed to a cleaner and more sustainable future for everyone, because everything we do is made for life.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Green Guide for UK Diagnostic Imaging, how to start making progressive steps towards the NHS net zero carbon targets, hosted by Canon Medical UK. The NHS has announced its target to be net zero by the year 2040 for the emissions it controls and 2045 for the emissions it can influence. But how can we get there? It is no exaggeration to say that humanity is facing an environmental crisis. Whilst UK healthcare has had to steer through testing times with COVID-19 pandemic threatening to overwhelm NHS capacity, other storm clouds are gathering on the horizon. We're here today to provide some practical guidance and advice in achieving this goal within your own department. We will be hearing from a professional company who specialise in carbon offsetting programmes, as well as sharing a case study of how Canon Medical UK has offset 100% of its carbon emissions. There will be a chance to ask any questions in the live Q&A at the end of the session. Climate change has been acknowledged at global level, and the UK government are setting targets across all industries. The NHS is no different, with its target of being net carbon zero by 2040. To give you an idea of the scale of carbon that the NHS emits each year, a recent study in 2019 showed the carbon footprint of the NHS in England totaled 25 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. As you can see from the graphic, 10% of this is produced from medical equipment. Other contributors include 10% building energy, 10% from staff commute, plus patient and visitor travel, and 4% from private health and care services commissioned by the NHS. We know that the knock-on effect of global climate change will impact UK health in many ways. For example, a rise in air pollution is linked to heart disease, stroke, and lung cancer. More heat waves put pressure on the elderly and vulnerable people, and poor air quality will drive up the numbers of fit and well people being diagnosed with asthma or other respiratory-related illnesses. Reaching our country's ambitions under the Paris Climate Change Agreement could see over 5,700 lives saved every year from improved air quality, 38,000 lives saved every year from more physically active population, and over 100,000 lives saved every year from healthier diets. These figures show us the reality of the difference that needs to be made, and with the right tools, we can all work together to achieve this. I'm now going to hand over to Paul Chiplin, Director of CO2 Balance, who Canon Medical UK are proud to have worked with since 2014.
Thank you, Danielle, for that introduction. My name is Paul Chiplin. I work for a company called CO2 Balance, and I'm going to provide a short presentation and introduction on how to become a carbon zero organisation. In terms of who CO2 Balance are, well, we started back in 2003, and we're based in Taunton, in Somerset, down in the West Country. We run a range of services based around carbon calculation, staff engagement, carbon offsetting projects, and CSR projects, which stands for Corporate Social Responsibility Programmes. Our projects include providing improved cook stoves to families, clean water projects, as well as health centre and school improvement programmes. All the programmes that we run have strong links to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In terms of where we operate, we're primarily East Africa based. We started off in Kenya back in 2005, and we've expanded into Uganda, Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. More recently, we've moved over to West Africa into Gambia and Sierra Leone. In terms of why I'm here today, well, the link is through Canon Medical, and we've been working with them since 2014 to calculate and offset their carbon footprint. So we offset the emissions from the projects they put into the market, as well as their own company emissions that they produce from their electricity, their gas, and their business travel. To date, we've offset over 30,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions for Canon and certified them as a carbon zero company or carbon neutral company. And they do that through supporting the high impact projects in Africa that we run, and I'm going to briefly talk about these now. So the first project that they support is our Kenya Improved Cook Stove projects. 80 to 90% of families in Africa cook on what's known as a 3-stone fire, which is 3 stones, a pot on top, firewood underneath. It's a very primitive way of cooking, and it's a very fuel inefficient way of cooking. The thermal efficiency of a 3-stone fire is around 10 to 12%, so only a small percentage actually heats the pan. As a result, you've got CO2 emissions being emitted through the burning of the wood, which is of course linked to climate change. But you've also got numerous local impacts as well: deforestation and local habitat loss. Children are often tasked with going out to collect the firewood every morning, spending between 1 and 2 hours collecting the firewood, taking time away from schooling and play. It's also a very inefficient way of cooking and a very unhealthy way of cooking. The World Health Organization have said that cooking on an open fire is the equivalent of smoking 2 packets of cigarettes every day and responsible for 2 million deaths in Africa due to the respiratory illness that it brings. It's a very smoky way of cooking on an open fire, and a lot of that smoke goes into their lungs. So our project is around supplying these families with fuel-efficient cook stoves that help mitigate a lot of these problems. We do this by providing fuel-efficient brick stoves and provide these to families for free in return for the carbon credits. Each of these stoves prevents around 3 tons of CO2 from being emitted every year, so it halves the amount of firewood they use, thereby halving a lot of the problems I've just spoken about. It also reduces smoke by around 60% because the wood burns on a higher heat, so there's less particulate matter being emitted. You can see the impacts from the picture here. It's a lovely lady who I went to visit, and you can see that within her home that there's black soot on the inside of her home, and that's from the effects of the 3-stone fire. And all that smoke was going into her lungs, and it's blackened the inside of her house. But because she's got a fuel-efficient cook stove now, these problems are greatly reduced. The other project that Cannon Medical supports, and is a project we run in all the countries I previously mentioned earlier, is our Safe Water project. This project is the rehabilitation of broken boreholes. So a borehole is a drilled hole in the ground, a pipe that goes down 30 to 50 meters to access the deep water aquifer, where there's clean, drinkable water. Now, these boreholes are drilled by well-meaning NGOs and organizations and then given to the community, which sounds okay in practice, but in reality, they break after around 2 years. And lots of studies have shown that there are sadly thousands of these broken boreholes in Africa. So when they give them to the community, they have minimal training, education, or access to spare parts. And they're not maintained. So they break. And it's like anything in life. If you don't maintain it properly, then eventually it starts to fail, and a small problem becomes a big problem, and then they're broken. So these communities are left with 2 options. They can either drink dirty water and have the health risks that drinking dirty water brings, or they boil the water to purify it. And in boiling the water to purify it, you've got the carbon emissions that are released from the combustion of the firewood, as well as the impact of deforestation, habitat loss, and the other problems I mentioned with the Improved Cook Stove project. So our project goes out to identify, repair, and put in a long-term maintenance program, and that's a key part here, to ensure people don't have to make that decision. Sometimes the handle needs replacing, other times the entire pump head needs replacing, or the internal pipes have rusted out. It's a project that I've had the privilege of going to Uganda many times, and it's amazing to see the impact that providing something as simple as fixing a borehole can make to these communities, and how much it means to them and their way of living. So rather than the image here where the young girl is collecting water from unsafe sources, when there's a broken borehole only a few meters away, then you've got this image instead, where communities are collecting water, safe, clean water, so they can drink without the fear of getting ill. In some areas, we put posts around the borehole. That's to stop elephants, large game, and cattle who were previously using it as a scratching post, basically rubbing their backsides on it so the borehole would gradually bend and eventually break. So we put the post around it because it's easier to replace the post than the borehole. We also test the water regularly to make sure it meets the national standards. So the project has a big impact on the local communities through carrying out simple things as fixing and maintaining the borehole. And we had feedback from our project in Zambia recently, where a lady came up and said, "Thank you very much for fixing the borehole," because she was scared of collecting water from the stream, because her neighbour had been, only the week before, had been bitten by a crocodile. So that's quite an impact there. The need and the importance of access to clean water is not something we in the Western world really appreciate. And it's something that we take for granted when we turn our tap on every morning. As well as these projects, we run school-based projects, as well as WASH programs, which stand for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene programs. We run education programs, solar projects, and latrine rehabilitation projects. In addition to this, we're running 7 health centre improvement programs as well. This is in northern Uganda, in a place called Lango, where we're working with off-grid health clinic communities that haven't got any access to electricity. It means they can't store any medicine, which needs to be chilled. So we've gone in and put in a solar system and provided them with a solar fridge in order to store and maintain the vaccines and medication. So in terms of how to become carbon neutral, well, everyone knows the waste hierarchy to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And the carbon hierarchy is very similar. So you calculate, reduce, and then you offset your carbon footprint. Now, it's important to get the management support of this at the top and employee support at the bottom, as well as working with your stakeholders in order to achieve the long-term aim of greening your supply chain. But to drill down on this a little bit more, I always say to people, it's not as complicated as you first think. It can be quite scary trying to work out your carbon footprint or to start the journey towards carbon neutrality. But you can take simple steps to make it easy. First of all, work out how far to cast the net. So the boundary setting, what are you going to include? Is it just your office or your larger estate? So you work out how far you're going to go with this. And then there's something called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Now, this is an international standard that defines what you should and shouldn't include within your scope of your assessment. A lot of it is based around data collection, so your electricity use, your gas use, and your business travel and so on. And these are the main areas to focus on. Then you look at the figures within your carbon footprint report to see where your biggest part of your footprint is, and then you can base your reduction work around the largest part of your carbon footprint in order to make the biggest reduction impact. And then there's the third step, which is carbon offsetting. Now, you're very likely to have a residual carbon footprint. It's very difficult getting down to absolute zero. So carbon offsetting allows you to take responsibility for your entire carbon footprint and take action straight away. For your carbon offsetting, it's a case of choosing the project, choosing the location, the technology type, and what carbon standard the project adheres to. All our projects are certified by an organization called the Gold Standard, for example. So you can make sure your project has been certified by an independent standard. And you may want to consider what co-benefits the project delivers. This was something that was very important to Cannon Medical, who were attracted to our projects because of the wider health and community benefits. And it is something that's worth considering when choosing your projects. In terms of the benefits of being carbon neutral, well, benchmarking is the key one. The old saying is that you can't manage what you don't measure, and that's really important. Ultimately, it's your carbon footprint, so it's your responsibility. And there's a wider need for climate action very much at the moment. It's in the press and the media. It's what the public and what your staff expect. If you go on that journey sooner rather than later, you also safeguard against future legislation, which I'm sure will be coming around the corner. So, as a summary, there is a carbon footprint to follow, and it's easier than you think. So don't be concerned or afraid of starting that journey, and it's open to most budgets as well. People are often surprised how well it fits within their finances. And as shown from the images of our projects in Africa, as well as the climate, you've got the potential to make a significant impact and a huge difference and help some of the poorest people on the planet. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Paul, for that very insightful talk. We've heard some great advice on how you can help work towards the NHS sustainability goals and how we can work to achieve this together for our planet. Cannon Medical UK has been recognised by the United Nations for achieving 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are proud to say we are continuously working to achieve more. At present, Cannon Medical UK is the only UK medical equipment supplier to be carbon neutral. Every system we supply, we offset the entirety of the carbon footprint from manufacture, shipping and logistics through to forecasted lifetime power consumption inside hospitals or clinics. This carbon is offset to a high impact project. This includes clean water boreholes or modern cooking stoves in developing countries, as Paul explained. For example, a Cannon Medical 1.5T MRI system has a carbon offset footprint of 226.78 tonnes, which then helps 245 people in Kenya and Uganda. Cooking on open stoves is a big health issue in developing nations, with World Health Organization figures stating that there are more than 3.8 million premature deaths per year from diseases such as stroke, heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and lung cancer. Cannon Medical UK's latest carbon offset report, which is externally audited and verified to UN Gold Standard criteria, highlights the cumulative numbers since it became a net zero carbon medical equipment supplier. It shows not just how carbon has been offset to advantage the health of the planet, but also how the well-being of less fortunate people in developing nations is benefited every time there is a new medical imaging installation into the NHS. In 2020, this contributed to 24 million litres of clean water provided from deep water borehole projects and 13,600 tonnes of wood saved and not deforested from the modern Clean Stove project. Clean water to drink and cleaner, healthier air for families to breathe inside their homes is a big deal, something we all take for granted. And the benefits cascade further. Children are able to go to school as they are no longer required to help their families to walk miles to clean water wells or search far from their villages to collect firewood for old, inefficient style stoves. Plus, females have been empowered in remote villages as they no longer have to risk long walks in search of water or firewood. The project also has an equality initiative to help get women's voices heard in the community. We are really proud to say that through the carbon offsetting project, Cannon Medical UK have been able to help 11,000 people, providing them clean water and modern stoves to improve health. As a medical equipment supplier, we take our role in this very seriously, and we've been working really hard over the years to ensure that we are playing our part. Our company philosophies, Made for Life and Kiyosei, shape Cannon Medical UK's mission and values of improving life for all, and this is at the heart of everything we do. We have recently developed a 5-point guide for UK radiology to give advice on what key things need to be focused on now for a greener, decarbonised and efficient radiology department. This includes how to embrace imaging equipment innovation to reduce departmental energy emissions at the same time as improving patient care, how to select carbon-conscious supply chain partners, the environmental benefits of taking imaging closer to the community, how to encourage and reward green behaviours within the imaging department to help with cultural sustainable change, and the benefits to standardising medical imaging equipment selection. Finally, at Cannon Medical UK, we're practicing what we preach. The use of recycled materials, reducing packaging waste, and the installation of motion sensor lighting in offices to minimise energy usage are familiar examples of a sustainable company approach. Cannon Medical UK are sustainably conscious throughout our daily activities, such as achieving the following: reducing our road miles by 50%, reducing our electricity usage by 50%, using 100% renewable electricity, reducing the office gas bills by 50%, introducing hybrid company cars, Cycle to Work initiative, zero landfill waste, and PAS 2060 verified carbon neutral operation. These are just some of the many examples of how Cannon Medical UK has made changes, big and small, for the greater good. We hope that you have taken away some key learnings from this session with ideas of what you and your departments can do to make a difference. If we all work together, we can make progressive steps towards the NHS carbon zero targets. Thank you for joining us. It's now time for our live Q&A with Paul Chiplin.
Well, as billed, we've got Paul and Daryl with us. And I must say, gentlemen, I thought your film was really inspirational. The work that you're doing in developing countries was absolutely fascinating. So thank you for sharing that film with us. I've got a few questions for you, and I gather Daryl's probably going to kick us off on the answers, and then perhaps, Paul, you'll join in if that's okay. So, Daryl, where did Cannon start first?
Well, if we go back to Cannon Medical in Japan, they started looking at something called ISO 14001, which is the environmental improvement standard, back in the 1990s. Cannon Medical in the UK, back in about 2008, decided that we wanted to follow the head office down that road. So back in 2008, we decided we would try and achieve 14001, which meant that we first of all had to start looking at where we had an impact on the environment in the organisation. So we did an impact assessment, and obviously the big areas were things like transport for company vehicles, the amount of electricity we used in our buildings, etc. And then ever since, every year we set improvement objectives. And as you saw in the film, over that period of time, I think we've probably achieved more than it says in there now. We've reduced our electricity bills through usage through sometimes housekeeping, getting people to just switch lights off and things like that, but then also the use of technology like LED lights, motion sensors, light sensors, etc. We've even put sensors into the toilets and things, so we reduce the amount of water we use. And then back in 2014, we'd done all the big stuff. And the amount we could do internally, we're still trying, and we still do try to reduce our impact every year. We decided as a company wanted to do more, and that's when we engaged with CO2 Balance to offset our residual footprint. We're still trying to reduce it year by year, and we reduce it. but what's left that we can't get rid of at this moment in time, then we offset that with the projects in Kenya and in Uganda. And that works really well. And I think it's a really good thing for the company to do from a how can I put it? A moral perspective, in my opinion. Okay.
Paul, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's been great working with Canon on this journey, because it's Canon a perfect example of an example of how you work towards carbon neutrality. So take steps to reduce where you can, measure, and then offset, because you're always going to end up with a residual carbon footprint, like I mentioned in the video. So it's about taking responsibility for your footprint, but following the carbon hierarchy and making sure you look at ways to reduce where you can, and then offset what you can't, as well, and offsetting through projects that make a big impact to people's lives as well.
How can we reduce electricity usage?
Okay. Well, the first thing is probably the perfect example is my home. When my children are at home, I go ballistic, because you can walk around the house and there's lights switched on and there's televisions left switched on, and it's the same in companies and in hospital departments, all over the place. So the first thing is to look at housekeeping. Try and change people's habits so that we don't leave things on. Or my wife's favourite one is that when the summer and the winter time change, she forgets to change the timers on the boilers, so they come on at the wrong times of day. So we're using more electricity, etc. Then now there's a lot of technology out there. You can look at things from LED lighting to we had old air conditioning systems which were very inefficient because it was used for heating purposes. So we've replaced the capital equipment as well. And then we found in places like our warehouse, when we looked at it, lights were switched on in the morning in the warehouse, and sometimes there'd be nobody goes in for 2 or 3 hours. So we put motion sensors in so that they only came on when people were in the area. And also in the summertime, we've got windows down one side. In fact, we didn't need the lights on at all. So there's light sensors, so it says, oh, there's somebody walking in, is there enough light? Then don't switch the lights. Yes, don't switch the lights on. So we can use technology. And then we're now looking at things like solar panels. There's a payback period on that, of course. It's usually around 5 years on that. And then lastly, whatever electricity we then still buy, we now look for, we only buy renewable energy. So that way we're not using fossil fuels for electricity usage.
Paul, do you want to add?
Yeah, like Daryl said, there's loads of there's technology can help you in a great way. But on top of that, excuse me, staff engagement's key as well. Getting the staff on board, from them turning the lights off to ensuring the monitors are switched off at night. We did a test a few years back up in Liverpool in a company where we put at the end of the day, we went up and we put a small little chocolate on everyone's desk who turned their monitor off. And then the MD sent an email around in the morning saying thanks to everyone who was a miniature hero and turning off their monitor to help reduce electricity, saving costs, saving carbon. And then about half the people had turned their monitor off when we first did it. We did it the next day again, and everyone had turned their monitors off. So never underestimate the power of chocolate is a key one. But it gets people involved. So set up a green team. An engaged green team with management support, and you can reduce electricity by 5% just by getting people involved to take simple steps.
Such simple steps. If you left a chocolate by my monitor, I would definitely turn it off. And also it resonated with me, Daryl, when you were talking about your family and people leaving lights on. I was looking aside to my 17-year-old daughter who's assisting today, whose lights always seem to be on. Did you come across any problems with it? Anything that didn't work for you, Daryl?
Yes, probably the most spectacular one for us is you can imagine we've got over 100 service engineers out on the road and sales and application staff that teach the hospital radiographers and the radiologists how to use our equipment. So one of our biggest carbon footprints is company cars transport. And a few years ago, we followed obviously the government's initiatives, and we went to hybrid cars. And basically, this just didn't work for us. The fuel usage went up. I don't know in litres, but I know how much it went up in pounds and pence. It went up by £250,000 because at the moment most of the hybrid cars, the plug-in hybrids, use petrol engines.
Yeah.
And obviously your battery only works for around 20 to 30 miles. So if an engineer's got to go 60 or 70 miles to his first call of the day where he's to a hospital, then after the first 20 miles he's onto a 2-litre or something petrol engine, which is doing about 20 or 30 miles to the gallon rather than 60 miles to the gallon. And of course the latest Euro 6 hybrid diesels are much more efficient than most petrol engines at the moment. So we've moved away from plug-in hybrids because it doesn't work in our application. We are now trialing fully electric vehicles, but of course that has difficulties as well. But in the meantime, we try to use the most efficient diesel or non-plug-in hybrid cars where possible.
Paul, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think this boils down to the importance of measuring. Annual measuring is really important, so you can figure these things out and to work out what's worked and what hasn't worked.
Yeah, it's important to realise what hasn't worked, I think. And Darryl, let's just move on. I'm just conscious of time and seeing a few questions pop in, but how important is waste management?
Yes, it was very important when we first started. Because I came into the company as originally as an environmental consultant to help them, and I found that waste management had been managed by the accounts department, and basically they'd signed up to deals just to make sure the waste was disposed of. They hadn't looked up where it was going, etc. So we started a zero landfill project. So nothing goes to landfill now. We try to, first of all, reuse the packaging where possible, which is one of our biggest wastes. And some of it even goes back and is reused at our European head office for our Second Life equipment to repack that so that it gets more than one use. And then we looked at recycling where possible, often with charitable projects. Waste pallets, we use a company that collects wood for charity, and then that's recycled. The same with cardboard. All our normal waste from the company, we try to recycle as much as possible through our partner Veolia. Everything that's left now goes to incineration. When that incinerator generates electricity to run 3 small towns in the southeast coast. And there's very little emissions to atmosphere, and in fact the fly ash that comes off at the end goes next door to the concrete block manufacturer to make concrete blocks.
Wow. Paul?
Similar to what I said about the staff engagement, people can you can reduce your waste significantly and increase your recycling by set up a green team and manage your waste that way.
Just looking at a few questions that are coming in, and offsettings have been a bit of I won't read all the questions because it's more or less saying the same thing, but Hannah says, how do you respond to concerns that offsetting is a distraction to incentivizing a real reduction in the carbon emissions entering the atmosphere and allow companies to continue with unsustainable behavior? I don't think she's suggesting you're doing any unsustainable behavior, but I think it's a fair question about how do we make sure that offsetting, isn't a distraction to everything else that needs to be done.
I guess the first thing is, well, you could say that when you go and speak to people in Uganda and supply them clean water, they certainly don't think it's a distraction. But it's what I said in the video. It's about following the carbon hierarchy. If you follow the carbon hierarchy, you measure, reduce, and you offset, then it's not a distraction at all. You're never going to get down to absolute zero. Or it's going to take us a long time to get down to absolute zero is probably a better way. By reducing your footprint now, by taking measure and reduce and offset now, you're taking responsibility like straight away rather than waiting for technology to catch up. So as well as making a huge difference to thousands of people around the world.
Dan asks, Daryl, how do Canon Medical Systems decide what impacts are going to be offset and what's going to be reduced through investment in efficiency, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good point. We have a register of all of our environmental impacts, and we go through a risk assessment process every year to determine which are the most significant. And we constantly look to try and set improvement projects to reduce those that are most significant. And then basically we offset everything else we do. We offset all the operations that are left within the UK operation. We also recognise that things like CT scanners are the big pieces of medical equipment, and Japan has been working for over 30 years on reducing the carbon footprint of manufacturing those scanners and the customer using them. But there is still a footprint of manufacturing it and the customer using that. We then offset that residual footprint for the customer. So basically, if we give a customer a CT scanner, we've already got figures from Japan as to its carbon footprint that's left of that particular model, the footprint of bringing it by sea from Japan, and then the customer using it for a typical usage for 8 years, and we offset that whole footprint so that we can say to the customers, well, for normal operations for the next 8 years, that scanner we've given you is carbon neutral. Yeah. Go on.
No, go on. No, go. Finish your sentence. Sorry, finish your sentence.
No, I've finished. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you finally, because we're sort of coming to the end of our session, but I think the audience would be interested to know how long you sort of have to wait, for benefits, really. We're seeing a lot of people, for example, put solar in, but how long does it take within a company to feel the benefits of what you're doing?
It depends on what you're doing. The stuff where the hearts and mind stuff where we get behavioural changes from the staff, weeks, months. When you're doing things like big capital changes in equipment, things like putting solar panels in, about 5 years. Big pieces, things like air conditioning systems and heating systems, probably between 3 and 6 years. But one of the things we did very early on, the building we were in was built in 1986, just before the new environmental rules and regulations about buildings came in. We spent £10,000 insulating the second floor ceiling between the roof and the offices. Paid £10,000. Within about 2 years, we'd got the money back and we were reducing the heating bills and the electricity bills.
Well, it's brilliant to have you both with us today. Paul's been popping on and off the main stage, so we'll leave it there. But thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, Daryl. It's been great to hear what you're doing, and thank you for getting involved with the Q&A with Canon. And as I say, very big thank you to Daryl and Paul for sharing their experiences both in person and in the film. It's time now for our lunch break, a chance to recharge, digest all the valuable insights that have been shared today, debrief a bit and unwind. Do jump into the meeting hub and continue to gain connections and build your community with your fellow delegates, or chat further perhaps to those you've already met. The great thing is that the connections you build are there for you to use into the future, logging in at your leisure and exchanging views with not just the delegates here today, but future registrants too. Our speakers can offer you plenty of awareness, but the most significant source of knowledge on the platform is you, each and every one of you. So do feel free to share your insights and your stories too. A reminder that we've got some great prizes for those fully taking advantage of community building. Those in first, second and third places will have their choice of prize, either Amazon vouchers, a donation to a charity of choice, or the planting of an equivalent number of trees. So let's meet back here at 2 o'clock for our next panel discussion. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.